I first met Robert at a mall. He said I could call him Bob. He was a shoe shine guy. He shined people's shoes for a living. He used to love to engage people in conversation, and he could quote poems by Robert Louis Stevenson by memory. He was a short man in his mid-50s, late 50s, with dark, worn worry lines in his forehead. You could tell by the way he dressed he wasn't well off, but he was pleasant. He was a simple man with a complicated past. I told him about church, and he said maybe he'd attend one day. And true to his word, the next Sunday he showed up. He entered a little timid, and I could tell he was almost intimidated, but soon there was a bunch of people gathered around him, shaking his hands, introducing himself, making him feel welcome. We were a friendly church. I got to know Bob better. He drank. A little bit too much, actually. He was an alcoholic, but that was just one of his many problems. I went to visit him at his house once. He had a small one-bedroom place in the back of somebody else's house. It had a fridge, a stove, a bed, and a table all in the same room. And it was a mess. Cigarette butts all over the place with ashes all over the floor. Empty alcohol bottles, dirty dishes. He invited me to have a coffee, and he offered me coffee in a stained, chipped cup. He told me he didn't get many visitors, and he was so happy I was there. And then we talked about some of his issues. How he felt because his wife left him and took the kids. And mostly about his loneliness. I encouraged him to get involved in the church and get to know people. We're a friendly church. He said he agreed. He'd already gotten to meet many people already. Bob didn't drive, so he found it hard to make it out on evening events. And on Sunday mornings, I'd often pick him up, especially in the wintertime. And he would help out with the coffee hour. But I'd noticed that Bob would be standing around the outside of the group, kind of trying to see if anybody would catch his eye so that he could engage in conversation. A lot of people would say hi and how are you, but nothing deep or meaningful. He'd often help to put stuff away. He'd wipe down the tables and put away the chairs, and as everybody was leaving to go off to their families, he'd be left alone. I'd ask Bob if he wanted to ride. He'd say no, it's okay, and he'd walk. I think it was because it helped to pass the time. It soon became obvious that although we were a friendly church, Bob never had any true friendships. And then it dawned on me, Bob didn't have friends because he drank too much. He drank too much because he didn't have friends. I was glad when I heard that he had moved to a new place. He said the old place was not very friendly and the neighborhood wasn't very safe. He was hoping that by moving to an apartment, there'd be a better community feel and he'd get to know people. Well, it didn't take long before I got to know people. They started to complain to the landlord about him because he smoked so much. It was Christmas Eve service when I saw Bob last. People were heading out, excited about the festivities and going home to their families, and Bob came by, shook his hand and wished him a Merry Christmas, and I asked him if he had any plans. Oh no, he said, I'm just going home. And I knew by that he meant he was going to drink away the evening. That was the last time I saw Bob. It was later that week that I found out he had died somewhere between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. No one had noticed. They had smelled something coming out of his apartment, and apparently he'd been dead for a few days. Can you imagine the week between Christmas and New Year's, and nobody noticing that somebody had died, nobody visiting him? And then I realized that mine was probably the last human contact that Bob had ever had. I announced it to the church that Bob had died. One lady came up to me and said how sad it was because, well, Bob was such a friendly man.